It's The Log. I'm Charles Purcell, and this is our Friday show going out to all the platforms. So if you're a regular listener to The Daily Show, just a reminder that our Friday show goes out to, just everywhere. Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Spotify. I don't know, everywhere. So if you want to subscribe, you can do that, and you get that once a week. And for you regular listeners, that reminder, we are on daily now, Monday through Thursday. Go to charlespurcell.com for the Monday through Thursday shows. I want to start today with a couple of clips from last night's march in Milwaukee. I've noticed that the local news, with all of their coverage, which is generally pretty good, except for the passive language they use, I think I mentioned in yesterday's show, they'll say things like, the protest turned violent, or police and protesters clashed. They'll use this passive language that implies that it's somehow on both sides. Well, we know it's not. We know that it's not. We know that 99%, if not 100% of the violence is instigated by the cops. I just saw a really horrific video late last night from Tennessee, where an old guy walks up to the cops, really, a pretty old guy. And I'm not sure what he said to them, but he looked very calm, and they just violently pushed him, and he fell backwards and cracked his head on the sidewalk, and it was very clear that there was quite a lot of blood instantly. One of the bystanders said, "Man, he's bleeding out of his ear." And even worse, well, how can it be worse? Then they didn't even help him. In the video, one cop reaches down as though he's going to start to help him, and another one of the cops grabs him and pulls him away. And then they quickly and violently grab and arrest a bystander. So here's this guy bleeding, blood coming out of his ear, and you can see it very clearly in the footage, this pool of blood. And he's lying there motionless. If you do see it, be warned. Some people are just going to have to turn away. Some people can't see things like that. But what I was starting to say is the local coverage I've seen, and the national coverage for that matter, nobody is taping and playing for the home audience the speakers. There are speakers at every one of these marches. They start with a series of speeches. They'll stop and pause along the way and make some speeches. Why aren't we hearing any of those? So again, thanks to some friends who are live streaming, and again, I really appreciate that. So I just wanted to play this for you. A couple of clips from last night's march. They walked all the way over to Tosa, which is good. I really applaud and encourage the marchers to go to the burbs. And apparently they picked up quite a lot of people along the way. So we got white suburbanites now joining. But anyway, here's a clip.
We out here in Wauwatosa, right? Yeah. So this is something that's near and dear to my heart because I was raised in the Milwaukee public school system, right? Until I was a junior in high school and I came over here to the suburban school system, right? So this is one of the first lines drawn in the sand where inequality exists, right? Because the home prices, the home ownership level, all of that stuff out here is much higher than less than a mile that way or less than a mile that way. So when we marching here in this community, let's understand the depth of being here in the suburbs. Let's talk about the systemic things that we need to change beyond marching, beyond chanting. We need to do this. I thank each and every one of y'all, Nitty, Camille, all of y'all. But everybody's talking about voting. Let's help these people to understand what we can do to be able to change these things through not just coming and saying, oh, if you're not black, if you don't vote for Joe Biden, you're not black. Or coming and playing a saxophone or reciting a Tupac lyric to be able to get our our cooperation temporarily, but to be able to understand that our black men especially, our black women especially, need help because we've been oppressed for now 400 years and the same stuff still exists. So that's all I wanted to say, y'all. Y'all keep y'all energy high and let's keep it moving. Yo, let's keep it moving, y'all.
Yeah, the coverage isn't all bad. As we mentioned earlier this week, you know, the big incident at 6th and McKinley. We knew about that because Channel 4 was on the scene. By the way, small correction. When I talked about it, I said I was watching it live. I misspoke. It was a live stream, but I watched it later. But it's in one full take. It's uninterrupted. So unedited. So I did misspeak. I didn't watch it live, but I saw it about an hour after it happened, I guess. Anyway, Channel 4 did a good job of covering that. But none of the coverage I'm seeing includes the speeches. Don't you think we ought to hear what they're saying? Occasionally they'll do a little soundbite with somebody. The reporter will go one-on-one and get a soundbite. Let's hear a speech. Why not? What would be more appropriate? Here, let's listen to one more. Oh, man. This is fantastic. I'm not going to say her name because she's just a little girl. And I don't know her name. But you got to hear this. 7-year-old girl marching with the protesters. They stopped in the street, and she had this to say.
They're shooting us or anything else.
Speak it.
We should be treated well, not treated bad.
Right.
We all are black. We should all be treated right. We shouldn't be treated different. We should be treated bad. We should be treated good. Because there's everybody in this world, just like me, that should be treated right.
Wow, man. Are you kidding me right now? That was fantastic. 7 years old. Last night. Man. So, Attorney General William Barr really needs to be impeached. We all remember what he did with the Mueller report. He came out and he just lied about it. Lied to the American people. Lied to Congress. And then held it for a good amount of time. I don't remember. How long was it now that he held it? A couple of weeks? Like 3 weeks? And established the narrative, the false narrative, about what it contained. Anyway, he's at it again. Lying about what we all saw with our own eyes. The tear gas, the rubber bullets, the flash bombs. Saying it was justified. Saying it had nothing to do with the Orange Menace's plan to go have a little photo op with the Bible. And then spending a good deal of this press availability yesterday talking about Antifa. He must have used the word Antifa at least 20 times. That all of the violence was coming from Antifa and Antifa-like groups. And then he trotted out the FBI director and gave him the same talking points. And I'm sure back in the office threatened his job. Said, all right, this is what you're going to say. Because, of course, the FBI came out just a couple of days ago saying, no, this is white supremacists. These are right-wing extremists. And even specifically, direct evidence that white supremacists, right-wing extremists, were creating messages in social media pretending to be Antifa, framing them. And just a reminder, of course, Antifa is not a group. It's an idea with no organization. But Barr and his Fuhrer have decided that that's going to be their scapegoat. That's going to be their little lie. So he not only lies, but then he forces the FBI director, you got to know it's got to be under threat of his job, to lie. Kind of disappointed in him. FBI Director Christopher Wray. Again, giving us the facts just a couple of days ago. Here's how the Daily Kos puts it. On Thursday afternoon, Attorney General William Barr came out for the cameras dragging FBI Director Christopher Wray behind him along with officials from the DEA, ATF, and Bureau of Prisons. And while every one of these fine officials was careful to speak the name of George Floyd and offer condolences to his family on the day that a series of memorial services began, there was one other name that got repeated over and over and over. In a performance that seemed to channel equal parts Peter Lorre in M and the Nazi with the burned hand from Raiders of the Lost Ark, Barr adopted his best low-key but menacing approach as he showed conclusively that there was a single purpose for this event: to blame all protest violence on one group and one group only, and to make sure Ray was on the record agreeing with him. In his opening statement, Barr spoke out about extremist agitators who are hijacking the protests, before saying that, quote, "we have evidence that Antifa and other similar groups have been involved." Of course, he wouldn't share any evidence. It's like McCarthy holding up the blank pages of paper. "I have a list here of communists." Yeah, of course he doesn't share the evidence. He says he has it, but he's just lying. There is no independent evidence that has been presented by anyone, by any intelligence agency, by any local police force, by the FBI. In fact, just the opposite. As I said, the FBI has already said that it's right-wing groups posing as Antifa. Independent journalists, investigative journalists have told us the same thing. So Barr had another one of his very special days there out in the spotlight, lying again. He's got to be impeached. And speaking of the Lafayette Square crackdown on peaceful protesters and the photo op, he's lying about that too. And the ACLU is demanding a congressional probe into that whole incident. Politically motivated, attacking peaceful protesters, dangerous chemical weapons, who the White House, their big lie yesterday was, that's not tear gas. Well, yeah, it was. It absolutely was. It's a mix of chemical agents. They wanted to get away on a technicality. It wasn't tear gas. As I heard one commentator tell us, the United States Center for Disease Control and Prevention labels the chemicals they used as a tear gas. So, there's that. Aren't we having a fun Friday? We're going to have to play that 7-year-old again at the end of the hour to pick up our spirits. All right, here's something we need to talk about. I can't offer you any detail today because I'm not well-versed enough. In fact, I found out I'm pretty dumb about some of these things. The whole idea of defunding or even abolishing the police seemed absolutely impossible just a few days ago. Back in 2016, when all of Bernie's ideas seemed so impossible, and then overnight they became mainstream, free tuition, Medicare for all, things like that. Well, the idea of abolishing the police or radically restructuring them and defunding them, that was only coming from my far left social media friends, my comrades. And now you can't open up a newspaper without seeing it. A practical guide to defunding the police. This is from Rolling Stone. Activists are demanding cities defund the police. Activists in Minneapolis are calling for more than just reform. They want the Minneapolis Police Department defunded. And those calls are catching on elsewhere as demonstrations against police brutality sweep across the country and peaceful protesters are met with more barbarism for speaking out against it. Defunding the police does not mean stripping a department entirely of its budget or abolishing it altogether. It's just about scaling police budgets back and reallocating those resources to other agencies, says Linda Garcia, policing campaign director at the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. A lot of what we advocate for is investment in community services, education, medical access. You can call it defunding, but it's just about directing or balancing the budget in a different way. The concept is simple. When cities start investing in community services, They reduce the need to call police in instances when police officers' specific skill set isn't required. If someone is dealing with a mental health crisis or someone has a substance abuse disorder, we are calling other entities that are better equipped to help these folks. So it's such simple logic. But up until a few days ago, this was not a mainstream idea. This was a radical idea. To scale back the police. We talked earlier this week in a prior program, according to DeRay McKesson of Black Lives Matter. Now, he gave us the number 5%. I don't know if I didn't independently check that out. But even if he's only half right, even if it's twice that many. He said 5% of calls that police go on actually require, the gun and the whole ready for violence thing. Everything else the cops are doing, traffic stops and getting cats out of trees, and as this speaker mentions, people with mental health issues, all of that 90% of what the cops do can and should be done by other agencies. And then to take it a step further, to actually abolish the police, again, an idea that no one except my most radical friends have been proposing. Well, abolishing the police is just a very small step from there. Because if we were to successfully reform city budgets so that all of that nonviolent activity is farmed to other agencies that are more equipped to handle it, and now we've got this 5 or 10%, and that's all we need the police for. And then we can really hone in on how they do their job. And then we can really talk about the ideas of chokeholds and the specific reforms aimed at the dangerous calls, the violent offender. This is absolutely doable. And an idea that either wasn't even heard of a couple days ago, let alone considered, is suddenly becoming a pretty common conversation around newsrooms and Zoom meetings and kitchen tables. Here's another one, Huffington Post. Police budgets have long been untouchable. That could change. Massive law enforcement budgets have only increased in recent years. Activists are calling to defund the police and invest that money into communities of color. Yeah, imagine the millions and millions of dollars spent. Chants to defund the police have reverberated around the country, from New York City to Minneapolis and through the streets of Los Angeles, as thousands of people protested racist police violence this past week. While some may hear the phrase and assume it's a radical, punitive step to end policing altogether, it's actually an acknowledgement of a simple point. Police departments typically have way, way more money than other government services that could better serve communities without subjecting them to brutality and violence. Collectively, the U.S. spends $100 billion every year on policing. That's $1 trillion in the past decade. That's insane. And of course, we see it now. These armies and armies of police officers in their full gear, every one of them, loaded, and these big military vehicles. It's insane. Yeah, we can't think small about this. We got to think big. We got to think big. And they're only proving our point every single night. The guy in Tennessee who gets his head cracked on the sidewalk. I'm not sure what the count is. I know for sure it's at least 7. At least 7 people have died in these protests. It might be and probably is more by now. That was the last number I heard. And again, it's right in front of our eyes. I don't care what the police chief says. I don't care what Morales says here in Milwaukee. I don't care what Barr says in Washington. How Orwellian can they get when they're trying to tell us to not believe our own eyes? It's this weird situation where the police are proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that reform is needed, as that reform is being called for. That's why the protesters are there. Like when you're in an argument with somebody and they get all twisted up because they haven't got a leg to stand on and they say something ridiculous and you say to them, you're just proving my point. Or, I don't mean to be critical, but you get really angry sometimes when it doesn't seem appropriate and it happens really fast. I do not get angry really fast. That's not true. You're proving my point. That's what the cops are doing every night of this thing. They're proving the point. They're showing us the need for reform. I used to give the cops a little bit of credit. I always kind of put cops and teachers in the same boat. Felt kind of bad for them. They're asked to clean up the mess left behind, a mess created by issues so much greater than they can control. So domestic abuse, poverty, malnutrition. Kids come from that world and the teacher's expected to fix everything and teach them. Poverty in the cities, racial discrimination, inequities, all the social injustice that we could go on and on about. Nothing gets done, and so it winds up being the cop's job to fix everything. I used to think that. I don't know, to a certain extent that's probably still true. But I've been learning, because I've been watching, because I have eyes, that there's very little credit or benefit of the doubt to give them. I mean, we've known for a long time that there's a culture of racism and of violence. But it is on display every damn night on the news for all of us to see. It couldn't be more clear. So the idea of defunding, or even if you want to use the word abolish, because if we were to defund and reallocate all of those funds to more appropriate agencies and leave the cops with only that small portion of responsibility, the real emergency, the violent stuff, and then we take that now much smaller agency and reform it, best practices, conflict resolution, de-escalation, then we don't have anything that looks like the current police system at all. It is virtually abolishing them. Now, here's something I'm embarrassed to say I didn't even really know. This headline kind of surprised me. Minneapolis Public Schools terminates contract with police department over George Floyd's death. It's from the Star Tribune up there. Minneapolis Public Schools has severed its decades-long relationship with the city's police department in response to the death of George Floyd in police custody. The school board voted unanimously Tuesday to terminate the MPD's contract to provide school resource officers. The district will cease further negotiations with the department, and Superintendent Ed Graff must come up with a new plan for school safety by the board's August 18 meeting. I value people and education and life, school board chairwoman Kim Ellison said in an interview. Now I'm convinced, based on the actions of the Minneapolis Police Department, that we don't have the same values. I firmly believe that it is completely unnatural to have police in schools, school board member Kimberly Caprini said during the meeting. So, this took me back because, again, I'm embarrassed to even admit this. Public schools have contracts with the police? Like they would hire a food service? Yeah, I guess they do. I mean, I never really thought about it. After Columbine, when the idea of having police officers in schools became a thing, I guess I never really thought about it. Yeah, school administrators, school boards have to make the decision to bring them in. And they have to be paid. So there's an agreement, there's a contract, and they can pull out of that contract. They can not renew it. I guess that didn't occur to me. I just assumed that whatever cop was assigned to a school was just part of the general budget. I didn't know that it was up to the school. So again, I can be a real idiot sometimes. I'm the first to admit it. And I saw several other similar headlines. Other school districts, universities with the same idea. No, you know what? We're not going to contract with you anymore. We'll provide our own security. We'll do it another way. We don't want you here. You don't share our values. How's this for a headline? Minneapolis City Council members consider disbanding the police. Can you imagine seeing that headline even 2 weeks ago, a week ago, a few days ago? This is amazing to me. Minneapolis City Council members consider disbanding the police. From City Pages. If you've been tuned into the Minneapolis public safety scene, you know that for years, Reclaim the Block and other grassroots community groups have been asking the city to do one thing: stop investing in police. Budget meeting after budget meeting, they turn out with their petitions and signs, demanding the city put less money into its police department and more money into programs that stop crimes from happening in the first place. Affordable housing, addiction counseling, violence prevention programs. The council's been listening. I think we've had a vision for a while of wanting to see another kind of city response to these 911 calls, says Council Member Steve Fletcher. Calls about mental health crises could be answered by mental health professionals. Calls about opioid abuse could be answered by addiction experts. Instead, both get cops, usually armed. I would say always armed. Have you ever seen a cop without a gun? I've never seen a cop in my life without a gun. So for those of you out on the streets, you got to know, this is just working. There's no other way to look at this. You guys are getting it done. And we're only in day, 10? Something like that? 9 or 10? The police are just digging their grave deeper and deeper and deeper with every peaceful protester they tackle. This is the beginning of a long fight. But you guys, you're winning. You got to keep this up. This just has to continue to grow. And by the time this thing is over, you're going to accomplish things that few people would consider even possible. With the commitment that you've already displayed. You guys can keep this up. When it's all said and done, police departments will be virtually abolished. This episode of The Log is available right now wherever you find your podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, iHeart, YouTube, and the podcast source. Enter Charles Bursell Presents in the search window. Or best yet, go to charlesbursell.com. There you'll find this and all the other series in the podcast family. Follow, comment, and contact me on Facebook and Twitter. Thanks to our flagship terrestrial station, River West Radio, riverwestradio.com. Theme music composed and performed by Peter Donalds. From the New Arts and Media Studios in Milwaukee, I'm Charles Bursell.